Imagine standing in a room filled with friends and family, celebrating the upcoming birth of your child, only to have your husband's pregnant mistress walk through the door. Sounds like a nightmare, right? But for Lisa, that was just the beginning. What she uncovered next was even more horrifying. A single document exposed a chilling betrayal that would not only destroy her marriage, but also bring down a powerful criminal empire. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The late afternoon sun bathed Austin, Texas in golden light, glinting off the glass high-rises that towered over the city. It was a place of ambition, tech giants, financial moguls, entrepreneurs chasing their next big break. In the midst of it all, Lisa Carter had carved out her own success. Her interior design firm catered to the city's elite, her business thriving beyond even her own expectations. She had a dream home, a picture-perfect marriage, and in just a few weeks she would become a mother. On the surface, Lisa had everything, but beneath that polished exterior, something was cracking. She sat in her home office, the late afternoon sun slanting across her desk. A half-finished client proposal glowed on her tablet, but she couldn't focus. Her fingers traced the condensation on her iced tea absent-mindedly. Her phone buzzed. "Mark, late meeting tonight, don't wait up, love you." Lisa exhaled slowly, staring at the words. Lately, the texts had become shorter. The "I love you" at the end felt obligatory, as if typed out of habit rather than affection. She wanted to believe it was just work stress. As CFO of a major investment firm, Mark's schedule had always been demanding. But something had changed. He had missed last week's doctor's appointment, the one where they found out their baby was growing strong. When she mentioned it that night, he had barely reacted, nodding absently while scrolling through his phone. She had told herself she was overthinking, that pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. Then why did her stomach churn every time he texted "late meeting"? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Emily Brooks stepped in, all sharp edges and confidence, her tailored suit perfectly pressed. With her keen eyes and relentless pragmatism, Emily had built a reputation as one of the toughest divorce attorneys in Austin. She was also Lisa's best friend, the one person who saw through her without effort. Emily set a Starbucks cup down on Lisa's desk with a knowing sigh. "Tell me you're not working." Lisa forced a smile and took the drink. "I'm not." Emily arched a brow. "Lisa." Lisa sighed, setting her tablet aside. "I'm just distracted." Emily studied her. "Talk to me." Lisa hesitated before admitting, "It's Mark." Emily's expression sharpened. "What did he do?" Lisa shook her head. "It's probably nothing. He's just been distant lately, working late, missed a doctor's appointment." Emily crossed her arms. "And?" Lisa hesitated. "Last night I woke up around 2, he wasn't in bed. When I went downstairs, I found him in the living room." Emily's brows furrowed. "Doing what?" Lisa swallowed. "On his phone, whispering. When he saw me, he locked the screen so fast it was like a reflex." Emily leaned in. "And you haven't checked his phone?" Lisa scoffed. "I'm not that kind of wife." Emily gave her a pointed look. "That kind of wife is the one who doesn't end up blindsided in court." Lisa rolled her eyes. "You think every man is cheating." "I think men get comfortable," Emily countered. "And when they think they won't get caught, they get sloppy." Lisa let out a dry laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're being dramatic." Emily shrugged. "Maybe, but I've been doing this long enough to know one thing. If something feels off, it usually is." Lisa wanted to argue, to push the thought away, but a pit had already formed in her stomach. The conversation drifted, moving to baby shower plans, nursery decorations, but Lisa was only half listening. When Emily left, Lisa curled up on the couch, exhaustion settling into her bones. She reached for her phone, debating whether to text Mark again, but stopped herself. Instead, she opened her emails, forcing herself to focus on something productive. That's when she heard the front door open. Mark walked in, looking as effortlessly put together as always. His suit was still crisp, his tie loosened just enough to give him that long day at the office look. But Lisa noticed the little things, the faint scent of cologne, one she didn't recognize, the way he avoided her gaze for just a second too long. Lisa smiled, suppressing the knot in her stomach. "Hey, you're home early." Mark leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, but it was mechanical, practiced. "Yeah, meeting ended sooner than expected." She studied his face. "You hungry? I can heat up dinner." He waved a hand. "Nah, I grabbed something on the way." Lisa nodded. "Right." Then his phone buzzed. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a notification. Without thinking, Lisa glanced at it. A message preview appeared. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Her breath caught. For a moment, the world around her blurred, the words on the screen burning into her vision. The ice-cold dread spread from her chest to her fingertips, making them tremble. She barely registered Mark's movement until his hand was on the phone, snatching it off the counter. Lisa swallowed, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Who was that?" Mark didn't even flinch. "Just work." His tone was smooth, casual, too casual. Lisa held his gaze, searching for something, anything, but his face was unreadable. He had lied to her before, about little things, white lies that didn't matter. This wasn't little. Lisa forced a smile. "Right, of course." She turned away before he could see the way her fingers clenched into a fist. Later that night, while Mark was in the shower, Lisa slipped into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized her own reflection. Her skin looked pale, her eyes dull and hollow. She had been so consumed with preparing for the baby, for building a future, that she hadn't realized how much of herself she had lost along the way. She placed a protective hand over her belly. She had spent months making excuses for him. Not anymore. Lisa turned off the light and stepped out of the bathroom, her decision already made. This wasn't just paranoia, something was wrong, and she wasn't going to ignore it anymore. Lisa gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The streetlights outside cast long, eerie shadows against the darkened windows of her house. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her heartbeat hammering relentlessly. She had read the message on Mark's phone over and over again. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Each word was a blade, slicing through the thin fabric of denial she had wrapped around herself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe... No. Her gut had been screaming at her for weeks, and now she had proof. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Taking a deep breath, Lisa forced herself out of the car. The house was silent as she stepped inside, the scent of Mark's cologne still lingering in the air. He wasn't home yet, another late meeting. Except now, she knew he was lying. Moving on instinct, she climbed the stairs to his home office. It was always pristine, his desk organized with military precision. Tonight, though, everything felt different. She sat down, powered on his computer, and pulled up his calendar. Meetings, investor calls, networking events, all neatly scheduled. But something gnawed at her. Opening their shared bank account, Lisa began cross-referencing dates with transactions. Her stomach twisted. A charge at an upscale restaurant, one she had never been to, on a night he had claimed to be working late. A boutique hotel, discreetly listed under a business expense. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled further. Mark had been living a double life, right under her nose. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. Emily's name flashed across the screen. Lisa swallowed hard before answering. "Hey, are you home?" Emily's voice was sharp, cutting through Lisa's fog of disbelief. "Yeah. You okay?" Lisa let out a shaky breath. "No." A beat of silence. Then Emily's voice softened, but it was still laced with urgency. "Listen, I know you don't want to believe it, but Mark is hiding something. And I think I can prove it." Lisa squeezed her eyes shut. "How?" "I've been looking into him." A pause. "And I found a private investigator. We can—" "No," Lisa cut in too quickly. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "I'm not spying on my husband." Emily sighed. "Lisa." Lisa pressed her fingertips to her temple, her pulse hammering. She wanted to hold on to the last shred of dignity, the last piece of her marriage that hadn't already crumbled. Then she glanced down at her phone screen. The message was still there. "Can't wait to see you tonight." A cold wave washed over her. She swallowed her pride. "Fine, do it." The next day, Lisa sat at a dimly lit corner booth of a quiet bar on the outskirts of town. The place smelled of old leather and whiskey, a stark contrast to the upscale cafes she was used to. Emily sat beside her, her eyes scanning the room. Then, the door opened. Henry Cole entered, his presence commanding but unassuming. He was older, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He wore a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, the kind of man who looked like he had seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted, sliding into the booth. His voice was calm, measured. "I understand this isn't easy." Lisa met his gaze. "Just tell me what you found." Henry studied her for a moment, then reached into his briefcase, pulling out a manila folder. He laid it on the table. Lisa hesitated before opening it. The first image was of Mark, walking into a luxury apartment complex. The next, Mark and Sophie at an intimate dinner, his hand resting on hers. The final image sent a dagger through Lisa's chest. Mark, standing on a high-rise balcony, his arm wrapped around Sophie's waist. His hand rested on her stomach. Lisa's breath left her in a rush, her vision blurred at the edges. Emily tensed beside her. He's not just cheating, Lisa. He's planning a life with her. Lisa inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the table. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Mark's coldness, the late nights, the avoidance. He hadn't just replaced her. He was erasing her. Henry cleared his throat. This isn't just an affair. His voice was low. Your husband has been making financial moves, quietly transferring assets, preparing for something. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. Do you want me to keep following him? Henry asked. She barely heard him. Mark had lied to her, betrayed her, built a future without her. But the worst part? She had let it happen. Slowly, she closed the folder, her expression unreadable. No, she said finally. I know what I need to do. Emily frowned. Lisa. Lisa stood, adjusting her coat, her body rigid with newfound resolve. I need to find out exactly what he's hiding. Her voice was steady now, the tremor gone. Emily studied her, then exhaled. Okay, what's the plan? Lisa didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned toward the exit, stepping into the crisp night air. For months, she had been sleepwalking through her life, but now, she was wide awake. Lisa's hands curled around the warm cup of chamomile tea, but the soothing aroma did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. Sleep had been impossible the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's phone screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. Her grip tightened around the cup. Emily, ever sharp and unyielding, studied her. Lisa, we need to talk about what comes next. Lisa exhaled slowly, her body tense. I don't even know where to start. Emily leaned in, lowering her voice. Then let me help. Mark is hiding things from you, and not just emotionally. If you wait too long, he'll move assets, he'll cover his tracks. We need to act before he realizes you're onto him. Lisa's stomach twisted. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was survival. How do I even begin to protect myself? She murmured. Emily placed a folder on the table and slid it toward her. I started looking into his finances. There are discrepancies, things that don't add up, but I don't have access to everything. That's why I brought in Henry Cole. Lisa frowned. Who's Henry Cole? A private investigator. He's one of the best. Emily's voice was steady. And from what he's found so far, Mark's lies go much deeper than an affair. Lisa hesitated before flipping open the folder. The first photo made her breath hitch. Mark dressed in a sharp suit walking into an upscale apartment complex. The next, Mark and Sophie at a candlelit dinner, her eyes gazing up at him with affection. Lisa swallowed hard, flipping to the final image. Mark, standing on a high-rise balcony, his arm wrapped around Sophie's waist, his hand resting on her stomach. Her stomach lurched. The room around her blurred, her pulse roaring in her ears. Emily tensed beside her. Lisa, he's not just cheating. He's planning a life with her. Lisa inhaled sharply. This wasn't just an affair. This was about replacing her. Her fingers trembled as she turned to the next page, a series of financial records. Mark had been transferring large sums of money into an offshore account. Emily gestured toward the door. Henry's waiting outside. He can explain better. Lisa nodded, her movements stiff as she followed Emily onto the sidewalk. A sleek black sedan was parked at the curb, and leaning against it was a man in his early 50s. His graying hair was combed back, his stance relaxed yet authoritative. Mrs. Carter, Henry greeted, his sharp eyes studying her. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Lisa crossed her arms. What do you know? Henry glanced around before lowering his voice. Your husband's affair isn't just an affair. Sophie isn't just some young assistant he's sleeping with. She's connected to him financially. Lisa frowned. What do you mean? Henry pulled out his phone, swiping to a document. Mark has been funneling money into a trust fund. On paper, it looks clean. But the real beneficiary? He turned the screen toward her. Sophie Green. Lisa's breath caught. You're saying he's been giving her money? Henry nodded. And not just any money, potentially laundered money. Some of his firm's transactions don't add up. If he's using corporate accounts for personal gain, it could be fraud, maybe worse. Lisa pressed a hand to her temple, trying to keep her thoughts straight. How much money are we talking about? Enough to make people start asking questions, Henry replied. Enough that if he gets caught, he won't just lose his job, he'll lose everything. Lisa's mind reeled. The betrayal had been bad enough. But this was criminal. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. Lisa barely registered what she was looking at until her eyes landed on 3 simple words. Baby Boutique. Her heart stopped. Henry's voice was calm but firm. "It wasn't for your baby, Mrs. Carter." Lisa jerked backward, as if she had been physically struck. "What?" Henry nodded solemnly. "Sophie is pregnant." Lisa's vision tunneled. The air was suddenly too thick, too heavy. She gripped the edge of the car, her knuckles turning white. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be right." Henry gave her a moment before continuing. "Mark has been making preparations, buying things, planning a future with her." Lisa felt something inside her crack open. The nursery she had decorated, the baby shower she had planned, the future she had imagined. And all the while, Mark had been building a second life, a life without her. Her breath came in short gasps. She reached for her phone with shaking hands. She dialed Mark's number. The call rang once, twice, then it clicked. But Mark didn't answer. A woman did. Lisa's blood ran cold. Sophie's voice was soft, tentative. "Mark?" Lisa froze. Her grip on the phone tightened. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then, as if realizing her mistake, Sophie gasped and hung up. Lisa lowered the phone from her ear. Her hands were trembling so hard she almost dropped it. Emily grabbed her arm, steadying her. "Lisa, I know this is a lot, but you're not alone in this." Lisa inhaled sharply, blinking back the hot sting of tears. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." Slowly, she straightened. A new kind of clarity settled over her. Mark thought he was in control. He thought she was blind, but now she had the truth, and she would use it. Lisa met Henry's gaze. "Keep digging, I want to know everything." Henry nodded. "Understood." Emily exhaled, relief flashing across her face. "So what's the plan?" Lisa turned, her mind moving faster than her emotions could keep up. Her marriage was already in ruins. Mark just didn't know it yet. "I'm going to let him destroy himself," she said, "and when he does, I'll be ready." Lisa sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting on her growing belly as she stared at the open laptop in front of her. The glow of the screen cast a cold light against the darkness of the room. Every fiber of her being told her to scream, to confront Mark, to demand answers. But she wouldn't. Not yet. Instead, she played the role she needed to play. During the day, she was the glowing, expectant mother, meticulously planning her baby shower and talking about nursery themes as if nothing had changed. She smiled warmly at Mark whenever he came home late, nodded at his excuses, and pretended she still believed him. But at night, while Mark slept soundly beside her, she pieced together the puzzle of his deception. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized. This wasn't just an affair. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Emily's voice was low, cautious, as she paced Lisa's home office. Lisa didn't look up from the stack of documents spread across her desk. "I don't have a choice," Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "You do. You could take what we have now, confront him, file for divorce, and let him walk away unscathed." Lisa finally met Emily's gaze, her voice sharp. "Let him keep the money, the power, while I raise our child alone? No, I need to know exactly how deep this goes." Emily exhaled sharply but nodded. "Then we do this right." Lisa's fingers traced the financial records. Mark had been quietly transferring money to offshore accounts, ones linked to Sophie's name. That wasn't what made Lisa's breath hitch. It was the signature at the bottom of one of the documents. Sophie Green. Not just a mistress, a partner. Lisa's stomach churned as she turned to the next page. A second name. One she didn't recognize, James Whitmore. She circled it with a pen. "Who the hell is this?" Emily leaned over her shoulder. "I'll have Henry dig into it." Lisa nodded, closing the folder. "Good, because if Sophie is involved, that means she knows more than she's letting on." 2 days later, Lisa played the perfect role. She hummed softly as she folded baby clothes in the nursery, arranging them in neat stacks. "You seem happy today," Mark remarked, stepping behind her, his lips brushing against her shoulder. Lisa turned, feigning a lighthearted laugh. "I am. The baby's almost here. The shower is this weekend. Everything feels like it's coming together." Mark studied her carefully. "You're not upset about me working so much?" Lisa smiled, shaking her head. "I know you're doing everything you can for us. I trust you." That was the biggest lie she had ever told. For a fleeting moment, something flashed across Mark's face. Doubt? Suspicion? Lisa held his gaze, waiting. Then, as if deciding it wasn't worth questioning, he kissed her forehead. "I'll be late again tonight. We have an emergency meeting." "Of course you do," she thought. She simply nodded, watching as he left. The moment the front door shut, Lisa's phone buzzed. It was Emily. "Turn on the news, now." Lisa grabbed the remote, her pulse quickening as the TV flickered to life. Investigation into financial misconduct has led to the arrest of prominent investment banker Eric Wallace, a senior executive at Hawkwood Capital. Sources indicate that more arrests may follow. Lisa's stomach clenched. Eric Wallace. He was one of Mark's closest colleagues. If Wallace had been arrested, that meant they were looking at the company's finances. That meant Mark was next. Lisa's blood ran cold. If Mark realized the walls were closing in, he would make sure she never found what she was looking for. That night, Lisa drove home from Emily's, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as the city lights blurred past her. The news had changed everything, and then she noticed it. A car in her rearview mirror. Black. Tinted windows. She switched lanes, so did they. A spike of cold fear ran through her veins. Lisa turned onto a side street, watching as the car hesitated at the intersection before suddenly pulling away. A coincidence. It had to be. And yet, she felt it in her bones. She was being watched. When she finally arrived home, she shut the front door and locked it, her heart pounding against her ribs. She checked every window, every door. Nothing. But as she passed the living room, she stopped. A shadow outside. Lisa's breath hitched. She slowly moved toward the window, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She saw it then, a single footprint in the damp grass. Not Mark's. Lisa's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Before she could dial, a vibration in her palm made her jump. Unknown number. Her heartbeat thundered as she hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice crackled through the line. Hey Kenthan, Kongoy Kong Moon Kotimra Su that. Lisa's grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? She demanded. Silence, then click. The line went dead. Lisa froze, the phone still pressed to her ear. Someone was watching her. Someone besides Mark. Her gaze flickered back to the footprint in the yard. This wasn't just about her husband anymore. Lisa looked down at her belly, her hands instinctively cradling the life inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself now. She was fighting for both of them, and she wasn't going to lose. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she turned the crisp pages of the document Henry had just handed her. The paper felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of a death sentence. Her death sentence. A life insurance policy, one that Mark had secretly taken out in her name, worth millions. Lisa's vision blurred as she scanned the fine print. She wasn't just insured, she was marked. Mark and Sophie were listed as the sole beneficiaries. The payout was set to activate immediately in the case of an accidental death. Her stomach clenched. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plan. Henry's voice was low, urgent. Lisa, listen to me carefully. This isn't just betrayal. This is premeditated. Lisa swallowed, the bile rising in her throat. Emily, sitting beside her, exhaled sharply. This is attempted murder. Lisa clenched the edge of the table. Murder. The words sank into her bones like ice. Her mind reeled back, every strange moment suddenly clicking into place. The herbal tea Mark had been making for her every night, insisting it would help her sleep better. The car that followed her 2 nights ago. The footprint outside her house. It wasn't a coincidence. Mark wasn't just trying to leave her. He was trying to erase her. Emily's voice cut through the silence. Lisa, you need to go to the police, now. Lisa looked up, her vision sharp and clear despite the terror clawing at her chest. And what do I tell them? That my husband is plotting to kill me based on a life insurance policy? Henry nodded grimly. With what we have now, it won't be enough to convict him, but it's enough to put him under serious scrutiny. Lisa shook her head. No, if Mark knows he's being watched, he'll disappear, he'll cover his tracks, we need more. Henry hesitated. You want to play along? Lisa, that's too dangerous. Lisa let out a slow breath, her hands balling into fists. Not if I control the game. Emily slammed her palm on the table. Damn it, Lisa. This isn't just some revenge scheme. This is your life, your baby's life. Lisa's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out before Mark could put his plan into motion. But she had spent too long being the fool, too long being manipulated, lied to. She wouldn't run, not this time. Lisa stood, her decision solidified in every fiber of her being. The baby shower, she said simply. Emily blinked. What? Lisa met her gaze. That's where I'll expose him. Emily stared at her, then shook her head in disbelief. This is insane. Lisa tilted her head. Is it? Henry rubbed his jaw. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Lisa's lips curled into a cold smile. He thinks he's playing a game. She straightened, her voice unshakable. But I play to win. A thick silence stretched across the room. Then Emily let out a slow, exhausted sigh and muttered, "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm in." Henry groaned. "This is suicide." Lisa met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Not if we do it right." Emily crossed her arms. "You said you wanted to see him burn?" A dangerous glint flickered in Lisa's eyes. "Then let's set the fire." That night, Lisa sat alone in her dimly lit bedroom, staring at herself in the mirror. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly, her fingers splayed protectively over the life growing inside her. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival, for herself, for her baby. She reached for her phone, ready to send one final text to Emily. But before she could type, the screen lit up. Unknown number. Her pulse spiked. She hesitated, then answered. A low, distorted voice crackled through the line. "Be careful. Someone doesn't want you to find out the truth." Lisa's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" Silence. Then, click. The call went dead. Lisa's breath was shallow, her heartbeat a rapid thud, thud, thud in her ears. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward the documents still sitting on the dresser. The life insurance policy, the evidence of Mark's offshore accounts, the murder plan. She'd already crossed the point of no return. Tomorrow, Mark wouldn't just be exposed. He'd be ruined, and she'd make sure everyone was there to watch. The morning of the baby shower arrived cloaked in an eerie stillness, the kind that settled deep into Lisa's bones. She had barely slept, her mind racing through every possibility, every risk. Today, everything would change. Emily sat across from her at the kitchen table, flipping through a thick folder of documents, evidence they had meticulously gathered. Offshore accounts, fraudulent transactions, the life insurance policy, the proof that Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was a criminal. "You still want to go through with this?" Emily asked, voice low with concern. Lisa wrapped her hands around her mug of tea, her fingers pressing into the ceramic. The warmth did little to fight off the chill that had settled in her chest. "I have to," she murmured. "If I confront him in private, he'll lie. He always does. But in front of everyone, he won't be able to escape." Emily sighed and set the folder down. "I spoke to someone, a former employee of Mark's. They're willing to come forward." Lisa lifted her gaze. "Who?" "Daniel Grant," Emily said. "He worked with Mark for years before getting fired. Turns out Mark was using company funds for personal expenses, lavish trips, luxury gifts, payments to Sophie." Lisa's stomach clenched. "Of course," Emily leaned in. "Henry also found something else. Offshore accounts, dummy corporations. Mark's been siphoning money for years. If we present this evidence the right way, we can expose him completely." Lisa inhaled sharply, feeling the last traces of hesitation slip away. "Then we do it tonight." Emily hesitated before nodding. "Just be careful, Lisa. He's dangerous." Lisa reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "So am I." That afternoon, Lisa moved through the baby shower preparations as if nothing was wrong. The house buzzed with warm chatter, guests arriving with beautifully wrapped gifts and well-meaning smiles. She played her part, the glowing mother-to-be, the perfect wife. But beneath the surface, her heart thundered. Mark had barely spoken to her all morning. His presence was suffocating, his eyes watching her too closely. He sensed something, but he wasn't sure what. Then, just as Lisa was about to welcome another guest, the doorbell rang. A delivery. She frowned as she unwrapped the package, a stuffed teddy bear, soft and pristine. But as she lifted it from the box, her breath caught in her throat. The bear's neck had been slit, the stuffing spilling out like an open wound. Her vision tunneled. A warning, a reminder. She wasn't just dealing with Mark. Someone else was watching. Lisa swallowed hard, forcing her breath to steady. Whoever had sent this thought they could scare her into submission. They thought wrong. She placed the bear back in the box, her hand steady, and turned just as her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You think you're smart, don't you? You have no idea what you're playing with. Walk away while you still can." Lisa's fingers tightened around the phone. Her heart skipped a beat. She scanned the crowd, suddenly hyper-aware of every face, every movement. Mark. Had he sent the message? Or was it someone worse? Her blood ran cold. It didn't matter. She wasn't backing down. She put the phone away just in time to see Emily rushing toward her. "Lisa," Emily said, voice tense, "we have a problem." Lisa frowned. "What?" Emily hesitated before stepping aside, and there, standing in the doorway, was Sophie. The room fell into a stunned silence. Lisa's blood turned to ice. Sophie stood tall, confident, deliberate. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, her pregnant stomach. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lisa didn't move, but across the room, Mark did. He had been speaking with a colleague, but now, his entire body tensed. His expression flickered, shock, then panic, then fury. He moved toward Sophie quickly, grabbing her arm. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed under his breath. Sophie smirked, loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. She said, "Oh, don't be shy now, darling. You weren't exactly trying to keep me a secret." The whispers grew louder. Lisa let the moment simmer. Mark's grip on Sophie's arm tightened. Then before he could try and control the damage, he turned to Lisa. His expression was a mask, cold, calculated. He stepped close, lowering his voice. "Don't do anything stupid." Lisa's pulse hammered, but she didn't flinch. He was losing control. She had waited for this moment. Lisa took a step back, then slowly, deliberately, reached into her bag. Mark stiffened. She pulled out a thick folder. Lisa met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Mark," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "perhaps you'd like to explain this." She flipped open the file. Offshore bank records, wire transfers, the money trail leading straight to Sophie. The color drained from Mark's face. Lisa tilted her head, her voice sharp, merciless. "Or should I?" A thick silence swallowed the room. Mark swallowed hard, and for the first time, he looked afraid. The soft hum of the ocean waves outside barely cut through the lively chatter filling the grand banquet hall. Crystal chandeliers bathed the upscale Miami restaurant in a golden glow, their reflections shimmering off the towering glass windows that framed the night sky. Guests laughed over clinking champagne glasses, voices filled with warm anticipation. This was supposed to be a celebration. Lisa Carter stood near the entrance, her ivory maternity gown flowing around her like an ethereal veil. She looked every bit the radiant, expectant mother, but beneath the poised exterior, a storm raged. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Tonight, everything would come crashing down. Beside her, Emily gave her arm a firm squeeze. "Last chance to walk away," she murmured, her voice laced with unspoken concern. Lisa exhaled slowly, her eyes never leaving the crowd. "No," she said, "this ends tonight." She barely had time to gather herself before a wave of gasps rippled through the room. The entrance doors swung open, and standing there, bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights, was Sophie Green. The room fell silent. Lisa's stomach twisted, but she schooled her expression. She had expected Sophie's arrival. She had counted on it. But what she hadn't expected was Sophie stepping onto the stage, grabbing the microphone. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Sophie's manicured hand rested on her swollen belly as she scanned the crowd. Then, with a practiced breath, she spoke. "I suppose I should introduce myself," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "My name is Sophie Green, and this—" She ran a hand gently over her stomach, her lips curling into a smirk. "This is Mark Evans's child." Gasps erupted, cutting through the air like knives. Lisa let the moment breathe. Mark, who had been entertaining guests across the room, stilled, his hand clenched into a tight fist at his side, his face draining of color. Then he moved. He stormed towards Sophie, his expression shifting between shock and fury. He reached for the microphone, his voice a low growl. "What the hell are you doing?" Lisa struck first. She strode forward, heels clicking against the marble floor, and took the microphone from Sophie's hand. Mark froze. Lisa turned to face the guests, a soft, almost sympathetic smile on her lips. "Sophie," she said smoothly, "thank you for your honesty." The entire room held its breath. Mark's head snapped toward Lisa, his panic barely concealed. "Lisa, She cut him off. "I know this is shocking for everyone," Lisa continued, her voice laced with just the right amount of feigned distress. "But what's even more shocking is that this isn't Mark's biggest secret." The crowd hushed. Lisa reached for the large envelope Emily handed her, her fingers steady. "But before we continue this lovely evening, I need to share something important." She took a deep breath, then turned toward Mark. "Something about the man I once trusted with my life." Mark stiffened. Lisa pulled out a stack of documents and held them up for all to see. "Mark, would you like to explain why you took out a $5 million life insurance policy on me?" A collective gasp. Mark's expression flickered. Shock, then rage, then calculated denial. He scoffed, shaking his head. "This is absurd. Lisa, I don't know what you're talking about." Lisa merely smiled. "Oh?" She flipped through the documents. "Then perhaps you can also explain these wire transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars sent to offshore accounts under your name. A murmur swept through the room. Mark's mask cracked. Lisa took a step closer, her voice like ice. And before you try to deny it, let me be clear. I've had a very thorough private investigator looking into your finances. He found everything: the hidden assets, the fraudulent transactions, the financial records you tried to bury. Mark lost control. You think you've got it all figured out? His voice rose, his fists clenched. You've been snooping through my life, setting me up. Lisa cut him off. No, Mark, you set yourself up. Mark's breathing turned ragged, and then he snapped. Before Lisa could react, he lunged toward her. A stunned gasp ripped through the crowd. Mark grabbed her arm, his grip vice-like as he leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. I will ruin you, he whispered. Lisa felt her pulse spike, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she smirked. You already did that yourself. The doors burst open. Uniformed officers flooded the room. A tall, authoritative man stepped forward, voice commanding. Mark Evans, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The air was sucked out of the room. Lisa's breath hitched. Mark froze. Murder? Lisa whispered. The officer turned to her, his expression grave. Mrs. Carter, we have reason to believe your husband attempted to hire someone to kill you. A wave of horror swept through her. She felt Emily's hand on her arm, grounding her. Mark's face drained of color. The officers closed in. Mark's panic escalated. His eyes darted around, frantically searching for an escape. No, this is insane. Lisa, you have to believe me. This is all a mistake, he shouted, his voice laced with desperation. Lisa met his gaze, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt nothing for him. No sadness, no anger, just relief. As the officers moved to cuff him, Mark did the unthinkable. He lunged at Lisa again. Chairs screeched as guests scrambled away, but before he could touch her, two officers tackled him to the ground. Mark struggled, but they were stronger. In seconds, his hands were wrenched behind his back, cuffs locking into place. Lisa watched, heart pounding. Mark was hauled to his feet, his face twisted in fury. You're making a mistake, he roared, thrashing against the hold of the officers. I'll fix this, Lisa, please. Lisa took a slow step forward, close enough that only he could hear. Then softly, mercilessly, she whispered the words that sealed his fate. I hope it was worth it. Mark's face contorted with rage as the officers dragged him toward the exit. Lisa exhaled. Her entire body trembled. The nightmare wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, she saw a way out. This wasn't just an ending. It was a reckoning. Lisa stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her heart pounding in her chest as Mark was forced onto his knees, wrists bound in cold steel. The once lively banquet hall was now a scene of pure hysteria, gasps, shouts, and the frantic rustling of guests backing away, whispering in shock and horror. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. She should have felt victorious. She should have felt relief. Instead, a cold, paralyzing terror coiled around her spine. Mark had planned to kill her. A man she had once loved, once trusted, had not only betrayed her, but had looked at her, at their unborn child, and seen nothing more than a financial opportunity. Lisa's breath came in shallow gasps as she took in the scene. Sophie was crumbling, mascara-streaked tears running down her face. She was sobbing uncontrollably, gripping the edge of a chair for support. I didn't know! I swear I didn't know! She wailed, turning toward the officers, her voice shrill with desperation. I thought he just wanted to leave her. I thought... She turned to Lisa, her face crumpling. I didn't know he was capable of this. Lisa barely heard her. Her world was spinning, her thoughts colliding into a violent, unforgiving storm. She turned to Emily, who was watching Sophie with a hard, unreadable stare. Is she telling the truth? Emily asked in a low voice. Lisa didn't respond immediately. She studied Sophie, really looked at her for the first time, not just as the woman who had betrayed her, but as a pawn, just like her. And yet Sophie had still made a choice. She had taken his money. She had turned a blind eye. Lisa steeled herself. You took money from him, she said, her voice steady but laced with quiet steel. And you stayed quiet while he lied, while he planned to destroy me. Sophie frantically shook her head. I didn't know about that. I thought it was just an affair. I thought... Lisa held up a hand, silencing her. Then prove it. Sophie's lip trembled. Lisa reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. She placed it on the table with a sharp thud. I have everything I need to take you down with him, Lisa said. Her voice was calm. controlled, dangerous. If you truly had no idea, you'll work with the police. You'll tell them everything you do know. Sophie hesitated, her eyes darting to the officers, then back to Lisa, and then slowly, she nodded. Lisa exhaled, the weight in her chest shifting. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't pity, it was survival. Behind them, Mark let out a low, dry laugh. It was a chilling sound, void of remorse. Lisa turned to face him, her expression blank. Mark leaned in slightly, just enough for only her to hear. "I may be going to prison," he murmured, his lips curling into a smirk. "But the people I work for, they won't let you walk away from this." A cold dread slithered through her veins. Mark's smirk widened as the officers began to pull him away. "Enjoy your victory while you can, sweetheart." Lisa's stomach dropped. Before she could respond, Mark was dragged out of the room, his voice fading into the chaos. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Lisa sat in the back of the car, her pulse still erratic. Emily sat beside her, silent but alert. Henry drove, his eyes darting toward the rearview mirror every few seconds. Something felt wrong. The night hadn't settled. It had only shifted. Then Lisa saw it, a black sedan. It had been trailing them for the past 10 minutes. Her breath hitched. Henry pulled onto a quieter street. The black sedan followed. Lisa clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Then suddenly the black sedan slowed. Then it took a sharp right turn and disappeared down a darkened street. Lisa swallowed hard. Emily's voice was quiet. "They wanted you to know they were there." Lisa shivered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A distorted voice crackled through the line. "You should have left this alone." The call cut out. Lisa stared at the phone in her hand, her knuckles turning white. The air in the car grew thick. Emily turned to her. "Lisa." Lisa's hands trembled as she tightened her grip around the phone. She turned to Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mark was just the beginning." Lisa's breath was heavy, her pulse deafening in her ears. "We're in something much bigger than we thought." Lisa sat in the dimly lit back office of the police precinct. Her fingers curled so tightly around the armrest of the chair that her knuckles turned white. The weight of the night pressed down on her like an iron vice. What was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a crime scene. Her husband, no, her former husband, had been arrested. The scandal was making headlines, social media was exploding, and yet none of it mattered, because Mark's final words kept repeating in her mind. "The people I work for won't let you walk away from this." Lisa swallowed hard. What did he mean? Henry cleared his throat, pulling her attention back to the room. The seasoned investigator had seen it all, but the way he sat, stiff, tense, unreadable, told Lisa that whatever he was about to say wouldn't be good. "Lisa," he began, his voice level but low. "Mark wasn't just committing fraud for himself. He was working for someone much bigger." Lisa's stomach dropped. "What kind of operation?" Emily asked, her usual sharpness edged with something colder, fear. Henry sighed. "Money laundering, but not just any kind. High-level corporate laundering for an international crime syndicate." Lisa's breath hitched. Henry leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Mark wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just a pawn, a valuable one, sure, but replaceable. Lisa's hands trembled in her lap. "There are other people out there, people who don't care about Mark but who would want her silenced." Henry nodded grimly. "Lisa, this is bigger than anything we anticipated. If they think you can expose them, you're a threat." The room felt smaller. The walls felt closer. Lisa wasn't just dealing with a cheating husband anymore. She had stepped into a war. Emily's voice was firm. "What are Lisa's options?" Henry hesitated, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. Then he lifted one finger. "1. Witness protection. You leave everything behind. Your business, your friends, your life. New name, new location, constant federal monitoring." Lisa's stomach clenched. She would never be Lisa Carter again. Henry lifted a second finger. "Or you fight. You work with the feds, help expose the entire network." His eyes darkened. "But if you do that, you'll be putting a target on your back." Emily's head snapped toward Lisa. "Absolutely not. That's a death wish." Lisa wasn't so sure. She had spent the last few months blind, deceived, helpless. Now, she had a choice. She could run, spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the day someone found her, or she could end this. Lisa let out a shaky breath, staring at her hands. They were still trembling. The stress of the night coiled through her veins like poison. Emily reached across the table, squeezing Lisa's shoulder. "Whatever you decide," Emily said, her voice softer now, "you don't have to do it alone. Lisa looked at her best friend, then at Henry. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she realized that was true. She wasn't alone. She had allies. She had a choice. A sharp knock on the door made all three of them turn. An agent stepped inside, handing Henry a small envelope. "This just arrived for Lisa." Lisa frowned, slowly reaching for it. The paper was slightly damp, like it had been left outside. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. A photo, a recent photo. It was her, standing outside the police precinct earlier tonight, but it wasn't just her. Emily was beside her. Henry stood nearby, and over their faces, someone had drawn a thick red X. Lisa's heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Emily grabbed the picture, eyes narrowing. "What the hell?" Lisa barely heard her because inside the envelope there was one more thing, a note, only 3 words. "Run while you can." The room went silent. The message was clear. Lisa wasn't safe, not here, not anywhere. Lisa stood on the balcony of her hotel suite, staring out over the city. The neon lights of downtown glowed in the distance, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat. Her phone sat on the railing. She had already made her choice. Her fingers hovered over the screen, then she dialed. A deep voice answered. Lisa inhaled sharply. "I'll do it." A beat of silence. "But I have one condition." The line crackled, then it went dead. Lisa exhaled, the weight of her decision settling deep in her chest. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. The ocean stretched endlessly before Lisa, the rhythmic crashing of the waves a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. She sat on a weathered wooden bench, staring at the horizon as the wind whipped her hair across her face. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe. But peace was a fragile illusion. A black sedan pulled up to the curb behind her. Lisa didn't flinch. She had been expecting them. Emily was the first to step out, her tailored blazer crisp despite the salty breeze. Her face was unreadable, but Lisa caught the flicker of worry in her eyes. Behind her, Henry followed, his usual stone-faced demeanor now weighed down by something heavier. Lisa exhaled. "Tell me." Henry sat beside her, opening a thin manila folder. "The cops have done their part. The laundering operation is collapsing, but there's still one loose end." His sharp gaze met hers. "And they want you to help tie it up." Lisa's chest tightened. She had been expecting this, and yet it still felt like a punch to the gut. "I want this over," she said, her voice steady. "For good," Henry nodded. "Then it's time to go public." Lisa walked into the courthouse under heavy security. The case against Mark Evans had gained national attention. The betrayal, the fraud, the attempted murder. Lisa sat in the front row, her hands protectively resting over her belly. She wasn't here for revenge. She wasn't here to see Mark suffer. She was here to end this. The heavy doors creaked open. Mark shuffled inside, hands cuffed, his orange jumpsuit a sharp contrast to the polished mahogany of the courtroom. He looked thinner, hollowed out, but when his gaze locked onto Lisa, there was no remorse, only hatred. Lisa didn't look away. Sophie sat in the witness box, her hands clasped tightly together. She had struck a deal with the prosecution. Immunity, for her unborn child's sake. Lisa felt nothing for her. No pity, no anger, no forgiveness. Just the understanding that Sophie had been used, just like her. The prosecutor spoke, his voice crisp and unwavering. "The state presents Exhibit C, financial records proving Mr. Evans transferred over $6 million into offshore accounts linked to organized crime." The jury murmured. Mark's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Lisa's pulse quickened. One by one, the charges were read aloud. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and then, guilty. The word rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. Mark clenched his jaw, then turned, staring directly at Lisa. For a moment, it was just them. No jury, no lawyers, no noise, just the ruins of a marriage built on deception. Then with a smirk that sent a chill down her spine, he leaned in and muttered, "This isn't over." Lisa met his gaze head-on, her voice unwavering. "Yes, it is." Outside the courthouse, Lisa inhaled deeply. The crisp salt air filled her lungs, grounding her. Emily stood beside her, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "So it's done." Lisa turned, the wind tugging at the hem of her coat. "Not yet," she admitted. "But I'm free," Emily gave a small smile. "That's all that matters." Henry approached, a single envelope in hand. "Lisa," he said, his tone measured, "I think you should read this." Lisa hesitated. The envelope was government sealed. With careful fingers, she unfolded the letter inside. Her eyes scanned the words. Her breath hitched. Emily frowned. "What is it?" Lisa swallowed, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "They want me to testify," she said, holding up the letter, "against the organization Mark worked for. They want me to help bring them down." Emily's brows furrowed. That's dangerous. Henry nodded. It is, but it could end this once and for all. Lisa turned toward the ocean. For so long, she had lived in silence, had let fear dictate her choices, had let men like Mark control the narrative. No more. She turned back to Emily and Henry, her decision clear. I've been quiet long enough. Lisa folded the letter, tucking it into her purse. As she walked away, the screen faded to black, and then her voice, steady, strong, rang out in the silence. This is just the beginning. In life, the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. Lisa's journey was not just about uncovering betrayal. It was about reclaiming her voice, her strength, her future. She faced fear head-on, refusing to be silenced. And in the end, she didn't just survive. She took control. This story is a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always a way forward. Justice, courage, and resilience are the keys to breaking free from manipulation and deceit. What would you have done in Lisa's situation? Would you have fought back or walked away? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love gripping, real-life inspired stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. More powerful stories are coming your way. See you in the next one.